Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Mug Up with BBNC podcast. My name is Anise, and with me is Carmel.
Hello.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing descendant enrollment, and with us is someone you probably may recognize. BBNC's president and CEO, Jason Metrokin. Hi, Jason.
Hello, Anise. Hi, Carmel.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I know most people listening to the podcast will recognize you, but can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your ties to Bristol Bay?
Sure. So, hello, everyone out there. I'm Jason Metrokin, president and CEO for Bristol Bay Native Corporation. It's been my pleasure to be in this role. I've worked for BBNC now, this year at least, will be 20 years.
Wow.
So, I feel old and experienced and wise, I guess, in some ways. I am not an original shareholder of BBNC, so I am a descendant myself. I inherited shares from my late grandfather, Walter Metrokin, who grew up in Kodiak but lived a big part of his adult life in Bristol Bay. He was the winter man for the Peterson Point Cannery in Naknek. So my father grew up in Naknek as a young child, as well as his two brothers, of course, my grandmother. And so my ties to the region are through my grandfather and my dad's side of the family. My dad ultimately moved to Kodiak, where my grandfather was originally from, later on in grade school. But yeah, I still have family members living in the region. Extended family, of course, like all of us. We have lots of relatives, cousins, so it's always wonderful to go home, to go back. I grew up in Anchorage, so certainly a different experience than maybe a lot of folks who grew up in region or in small communities. But yeah, I love Bristol Bay, and I still refer to it as home, even though I've never lived there.
Awesome. Let's dive into descendant enrollment. BBNC announced descendant enrollment initiative at the 2024 annual meeting of shareholders. Let's just recap. What is descendant enrollment?
So descendant enrollment is a way that Alaska Native corporations can engage through enrollment of shares. They're younger generations who were born after December 18, 1971, to become actual shareholders or stockholders in the corporation. And half of the 12 regional ANCs have done this, and a number of village corporations, including our largest village corporation, Chogang Limited.
Now, for most of us still processing all the details or perhaps wondering how this will affect them personally, we've gathered some commonly asked questions that we'll go through. Let's begin at the very beginning. So what inspired this initiative, and why should shareholders learn more about it?
Yeah, big question. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been working for BBNC for 20 years. And for my entire career, descendant enrollment has been a super popular, often revisited topic, right? So as a shareholder and a descendant, young people want to know how to best engage with their corporation. And for many years, BBNC has been asking our shareholders what it means to be a descendant, what would it mean to be a shareholder if you're not an original shareholder. And again, if you look at the 1991 amendments to ANCSA, this was sort of the beginning of when corporations and their shareholders really began those conversations around descendant enrollment. So those amendments allowed corporations to enroll younger generations and descendants. And so BBNC, like many others, began studying the issue way back then. And we have a number of surveys that have been conducted over those many decades. And, you know, to be honest, at first, there wasn't a lot of support for enrolling descendants in the early 1990s. We were a much different corporation then, and, you know, we were really 20 years from our incorporation, so we were still sort of learning our way and experiencing new things and investing in new and different things at that time. So I think shareholders were pretty comfortable in the fact that we had not considered enrolling our descendants, but at the same time, it was a common question. You know, those who were born after 1971 wanted to know, how can I become a shareholder? My parents are, my grandparents are, maybe even my siblings are, and people just wanted to know how to best engage. So we kept continuing to ask those types of questions. The initial responsiveness from our shareholders, again, back in those early days was, we don't think we need to do that. We're happy with the way the corporation is structured now. But as time went on, we kept asking the questions, surveying our shareholders, and more people began to think, well, it might be nice to enroll our descendants at some point. And fast forward to today, our most recent poll, the majority of our shareholders believe, granted there needs to be proper ways in which to do it, but they believe that our descendants should be enrolled in the corporation.
just getting into a deeper dive on what this could look like. If a descendant already has BB&C shares that they were gifted or inherited, would they be able to enroll as a new shareholder if this is passed?
Yes, is the short answer. I'll take myself as an example. I inherited shares from my late grandfather, as I mentioned, and so I've been a shareholder since his passing. Now, I'm still a descendant, and so as I would qualify or need to qualify as a descendant, I too could receive new shares, newly developed shares through descendant enrollment from the corporation. My two sons, those who were born after 1971 who do not currently have shares, if they're eligible, could enroll, and those who already have shares through gifting or inheritance could also enroll.
And how many shares would descendants be receiving if they enroll?
So our board has made the decision that new enrollees to BB&C would receive 20 shares of stock from the corporation. Different stock than original enrollees. It has a different class, but 20 shares of BB&C descendant stock.
And then will enrolling descendants affect the current shareholder dividends?
So this is the big question, right? Shareholders want to know, if I support descendant enrollment, what does that mean for me? What does it mean for my dividend? BB&C's goal is to not negatively affect current shareholder dividends. And when you think about it, the commonly used analogy, if you will, is a pizza. If the three of us are eating a pizza, we can sort of split it up in thirds and say, Anish, you get a third, Carmel, you get a third, and I get a third. When you enroll new descendants or you enroll people into the pizza party, you cut that pizza up in more ways. And so each of us gets less than the original amount. So BB&C, the way that we administer our dividend program is, first of all, the board makes those decisions every quarter as to how much dividends are going to be. So that's an important fact. The second piece is that when we look at that pizza, rather than dividing it up equally amongst each of the shareholders, including those new enrolled shareholders, BB&C's annual dividend budget goes up by 3%. And so each year that dividend has been going up 3%. As we enroll new descendants, the amount that the dividend goes up is then shared amongst all shareholders. In this case, original shareholders, and if descendant enrollment does pass, that would include those descendant shareholders. So our goal is to not have original shareholder dividends decline or not have a negative impact on those dividends, but to allow those to continue to grow while we start to pay new descendant dividends, and then ultimately those would grow as well.
So they'll be receiving two different dividend rates based on the class of stock they have.
Correct. If you're an owner of original BB&C stock, you would get one dividend amount. If you're an owner in the newly created class of stock for descendants, you would get a different amount. If you're a shareholder in both, right, if you were gifted or inherited original shares, you would receive the associated dividend for that. But if you were also an eligible descendant and you enrolled with BB&C as a descendant, again, if descendant enrollment passes, you would receive your dividends associated with that stock as well.
Okay, that makes sense. Going back to eligibility, will there be a blood quantum requirement to enroll and receive shares?
Another great question. So this has come up just as much, if not more, than the dividend question, but BB&C's board has made a decision that a blood quantum requirement will not be required in this case for descendants. This issue is something that's been debated heavily in recent years. And I mentioned earlier, those 6 regional corporations that have so far enrolled their descendants, many of them had a blood quantum requirement. In fact, when all corporations were first created in 1971, we all had a blood quantum requirement. That is still in place. BB&C has made a determination that for the descendants, as they enroll, there will not be a blood quantum requirement for that. And it's really, again, a hotly debated issue, and people have lots of really passionate opinions about it. But BB&C really sees our descendants as direct lineal descendants of their family members. And to force a blood quantum requirement, really, there will be those that are left out. There'll be those that are in the corporation, those are out of the corporation based on sort of a government requirement at one point in time, many decades ago. So the board has decided to do away with that for descendants. Regardless of the blood quantum, if they can prove or their families can prove that they are a direct lineal descendant, they would be eligible for BB&C as a descendant. To my knowledge, of all of the regional corporations, only one today still has a blood quantum requirement for its descendants. So several have done away with that.
So if someone's a registered descendant already, do they have to apply for descendant enrollment?
While BB&C is making an effort to register descendants to make sure that we have names and addresses and information, once the application portal is available for descendant enrollment, even though you might be a registered descendant, you'll still need to apply for your enrollment into BB&C as a stockholder. We may have information about that descendant already, but they still need to follow through with the application process. It might make the application process a little more streamlined or easier because we have collected some of that information, but just being a registered descendant does not qualify you as an applicant. You still have to go through the application process.
What's the timeline for BBNC's rollout of descendant enrollment if this does pass by shareholders?
The vote will take place at the October 2025 annual meeting, so that's this year. And assuming that the vote is in support of opening our rolls to descendants, our goal is to have an application portal ready to go by mid-November of this year so that families, descendants, and can begin that enrollment process through an application, and that would be available to all descendants. And again, in some cases, may need the help of their families to enroll them. And then we'd make sure that our shareholders are very aware of the process and well communicated to when that portal is alive and ready to go.
So talking about the vote in October, who is going to be eligible to participate in that?
So all current shareholders who have voting shares of BBNC will be eligible to vote on that issue. Descendants, if they're not current shareholders and including voting shares, cannot vote on descendant enrollment. It's only those who own those voting shares.
So as shareholders get ready to make this important decision for the corporation, what can they do to prepare?
So this is a great conversation for families at the dinner table or just, in conversation, with parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and siblings to have, amongst their families. In the home, I've no doubt people are talking about it maybe in the workplace, certainly here at BBNC. This is a great conversation to have with descendants to talk about, number one, what's the role to be a shareholder, but also what's the responsibility. So the role of being a shareholder is certainly benefiting from any number of things at BBNC, whether it's a dividend for descendants or we know our descendants are already qualifying for employment and training opportunities, as well as now scholarships from the Bristol Bay Foundation. But the rights and the responsibilities of a shareholder also include they should be engaging with the corporation. They should find out what the corporation is up to in terms of new investments, new opportunities, and ultimately voting at our annual meeting. So those are things that we want to make sure that descendants are well aware of. And through our communications and other forms of engaging with shareholders, we want to make sure that our descendants are welcomed into the corporation, but they're also educated on what it means to be a shareholder.
Where can they find information to get more connected to BBNC?
Our website is the best place, visiting bbnc.net/DE for descendant enrollment. We have a load of information on there that is being updated regularly as more information becomes available. People can also reach out to BBNC via email at info@bbnc.net, and we also have a contact form on our website that is accessible for shareholders anytime.
I would add that, it's great to go to the resources that BBNC is providing as much as it is great to have those conversations amongst friends and family, but make sure you're getting the facts, right? Make sure you're getting the accurate information. Like anything else, there's no doubt that there will be rumors and assumptions, and that's normal human nature, but go to the resources that are factual. BBNC's website, talk to our staff. We'll have our information meetings coming up this fall, which will be a great way to ask questions of BBNC management as well as our board members, but make sure that you get the accurate information.
Well, when it comes to descendant enrollment, what are you most excited about, Jason?
I'm excited about a lot of things. First off, this is something that we, BBNC, and our shareholders have been talking about for decades. I'm excited to see a new dynamic at BBNC. Even though we have a lot of descendants who are already a part of the corporation because they were gifted or inherited stock, there's a lot of descendants who are not shareholders. And when we think about the evolution of the typical BBNC shareholder, it's changed quite a bit over the 50 plus years that we've been in business. We have young folks who have different understanding of technology, or they have different experiences, worldly experiences. And we have a number of folks who may not have lived their whole life in Bristol Bay. That's not a good or bad thing. It's just a fact that they have a different experience overall. So bringing those ideas, bringing those thoughts, bringing those opinions to the table for the corporation shouldn't be a scary thing. BBNC has evolved a lot as a corporation. We have investments all over the world. We have shareholders living all over the world, and we are always going to have that tie back to the region, our lands, our values, our languages. That's something that we want to continue to promote and talk about and encourage shareholders to stay engaged with. But what else is going on around the world where BBNC as a corporation can benefit through the eyes of our shareholders? That's the exciting part to me. Keeping those Alaska Native and Bristol Bay ties is of utmost importance, our cultural values, but we need to continue to evolve. After 50 years, cannot imagine what we're going to look like 50 years from now, but if it's inclusive of our descendants, I think it'll be a positive thing.
Anything else you want to add?
I mean, I could turn the tables on you guys and ask, what are you hearing amongst descendant shareholders or descendants who aren't shareholders? Maybe it's almost two different questions, but.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard a whole lot outside of excitement to become a part of the corporation. And I'm hearing that not only from descendants, but from original shareholders too. And I mean, you saw it at the annual meeting. When you made this announcement, you got a standing ovation, which was like gave me goosebumps at the annual meeting. So I think people are filled with excitement. And I know me personally, I'm excited for my kids to have an opportunity. I mean, they already feel connected to BBNC and Bristol Bay just through my work here. I'm excited for them to grow that relationship with the corporation as they're growing themselves.
What about some of the concerns or the negativity? Because we know there's two sides to the coin.
I mean, you stated the biggest concern is the dividend and how that's going to be impacted. That's what I've heard the most. And there's still a lot of questions that BBNC needs to answer that we'll be prepared to, as we come into info meeting season and as the board makes their decisions about dividends and the new descendant dividend and how that's going to be executed. But I know there are some questions about how will BBNC do this?
Yeah.
How are they going to issue new shares without impacting my dividend?
We talked earlier about the goal of not having a negative impact or a lowering of current shareholder dividends. That is our stated goal. But shareholders and descendants should know that it requires us to have prudent investments and ultimately consistent and growing cash flow to pay those dividends. The onus is on BBNC to make sure that we have the cash flow and the earnings and good investments to pay those dividends going forward. So, we're putting extra pressure on ourselves, but it's also exciting challenges, right? To continue to have really good, consistent dividends paid to our shareholders, which has been for many decades now our great success story. But in the future, we have to continue to do that in order to fund those dividend programs for current and future shareholders.
Do you want to talk about the 1.5 million shares that shareholders will be voting to approve?
Sure. So when BBNC was originally incorporated, we had to determine how many shares of stock that we were going to create in order to distribute those shares to all of the shareholders that enrolled in the early 1970s. The same decision was made in terms of new descendant shareholders. We only have so many shares of stock today for those original stockholders. We have to create new stock, Class D stock in this case, for descendants. And so the corporation is creating 1.5 million new shares of BBNC stock that will be available for current and future descendants to actually be physical stockholders in the corporation. So that's going to be way more than we need, but we still feel that it's an appropriate amount so that we don't have to go back to shareholders again in the future to say, well, we only created a couple 100,000 shares of descendant stock and we've distributed all of those. So we need to go back to the shareholders and have them vote a second time or a third time to create even more Class D stock. So we made the determination through some good analytics and future thinking to say that 1.5 million shares of Class D descendant stock should last BBNC for many, many years to come.
And the Class D stock that will be created will be life estate stock. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. The difference between the current BBNC stock is that ANCSA allows current BBNC shareholders to pass on that stock through gifting or inheritance once they pass away. For descendant stock, this will be a different form called life estate. So the difference being, if descendant enrollment passes and we're distributing those Class D shares to descendants, when that descendant passes away, that life estate stock will revert back to BBNC so that we can redistribute it to a future descendant. So those Class D shares are not giftable and they can't be passed on through inheritance to a descendant's heirs.
Well, this has been a super good informational conversation, and I hope that it will help our listeners. And so thank you so much, Jason,
My pleasure.
for being on the podcast and going through this. I'll reiterate that you can find more information about descendant enrollment and stay up to date by visiting bbnc.net/DE. And with that, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
We are one Bristol Bay. No matter the distance, we travel together. Our connections are bigger than place. They are traditions and memories. All of us moving forward together to create a path for the generations that follow. Bristol Bay Native Corporation, always more than a corporation.